Hello and welcome to the Kim Iversen Show. Thank you so much for being here. I want to show you some of the latest that's going on at the WEF in Davos. There's been a lot of crazy stuff being said. One of the most crazy or most alarming, I think, for many of us is the statements that were made by Tony Blair. Watch this.
I think you won't get the focus you need unless it's clear two things. One, that there is an ongoing challenge and opportunity. And I think that is not just about COVID. It's about the fact that we are going to have a whole slew of new vaccines, injectables, that are going to deal with some of the worst diseases in the world, that give us the opportunity to make big changes in the health of the world. When it's all said and done, it was still a pretty remarkable operation. And by the way, Seppi did a fantastic job. You guys deserve a lot of congratulations for it. But so I think it's around things like, how do you make sure you get the right scientific cooperation and the cooperation between the regulatory authorities, so in the future you can clear things much faster? For example, on the continent of Africa, if we had an equivalent to the European Medicines Agency, we had an African Medicines Agency that allowed you to have one system, one standard, which hugely changed the way that vaccines and treatments are introduced in Africa. I think there's a huge impetus now for a national digital infrastructure. Digitization in healthcare is, I think, one of the great game changers. We should be helping countries to develop a national digital infrastructure, which they will need with these new vaccines. And then, finally, it's also about showing people and showing the political leadership that you can make a positive difference to your healthcare system by adopting these measures, because they've got an impact beyond any particular disease or pandemic.
Okay, a few things to go over there. I mean, if that didn't shock you enough. But first, he talks about this opportunity, right? There's this opportunity that we have now because of COVID-19 and these vaccines and the digital IDs. And so now we've got this great opportunity. And he talks about this opportunity not about the COVID vaccine, but about future vaccines. So now we're talking about mandates and digital IDs and rollouts, not for COVID anymore. I think many of us are past that, right? The governments are maybe, they've realized, okay, people are not even interested in the bivalent vaccine anymore. We've only got about a 15 to 20% uptake on that. So what can we do in the future to ensure more of this compliance, to ensure Big Pharma makes even more money, apparently, right? So he says, oh, this is a great opportunity. Then he goes on to talk about cooperation. He wants cooperation between the medical community and governments. How do we get Big Pharma to cooperate? How do we get politicians to cooperate, governments to cooperate? We need this cooperation, which in order to get that cooperation, they're going to have to probably do a lot of coercion, right? There will be mandates. There will be talks of you must do this if you want XYZ things in life, like, I don't know, access to the beach, access to grocery stores, utilities. If you want these basic things, then you're going to need to cooperate with us. I mean, this is where we're headed. I know it sounds alarmist, but I'll tell you what. When the first vaccines were talked about for COVID-19, when people were talking about rolling this out and Operation Warp Speed and whatnot, I did not believe, and I know many of you did not either, I did not believe that we would ever end up in a state of mandates. People would email me, they'd say, Kim, they're going to mandate it. If they bring out a vaccine for COVID-19, they're going to mandate it. And I genuinely did not believe that that would happen in the United States of America. I really believed that the American people would be way too resistant to being forced to take an experimental medicine that essentially, they didn't do enough testing on it. We know this, right? But I was wrong about that. I was very wrong about that. So now hearing Tony Blair talk, anybody, others that could listen to it, that a lot of people that are very pro, the COVIDians, right? They would listen to Tony Blair speak and they would say, oh, no, don't quit being an alarmist. Don't be a conspiracy theorist. He's just talking about getting African countries vaccines because they have healthcare systems that are antiquated. We're trying to get them up to speed. He's just talking about, there's nothing nefarious going on here. Sure, we could all believe that there's nothing nefarious. He didn't say specifically mandates, but we saw what happened with COVID. So now we should all be on edge. We should all be on alert. They're ready to do this again to us. And they might not mandate it in the same way they did COVID, but they'll certainly dangle the carrots, right? They'll say, well, you can't do XYZ thing unless you get this vaccine. It's mandatory. We insist you are vaccinated before you can participate in society because you are a danger to society, you anti-vaxxer, you. That has been the message throughout COVID, even though we found out very early on, actually, that the vaccines, what they call vaccines, did not stop the spread of COVID. That is now known. Everybody, I think, in the world knows. I mean, actually, surprisingly, I still see people online, on Twitter threads or on other social media threads, and they're talking about, why aren't these anti-vaxxers getting these vaccines? Don't they realize that they are spreading it? They're spreading COVID to their family members. They're spreading COVID to their coworkers, like as if they genuinely do not realize that the vaccines, the COVID vaccines, are not stopping the spread. So there are still people who are in that mindset, even today, surprisingly. So Tony Blair goes on and talks about Africa and how we've got to get the Africans on board. Now, if you remember, there was a big smear campaign against South Africa. Remember when Omicron rolled out? This was in November of 2021. Around Thanksgiving, suddenly there was a new variant that got spotted in South Africa. And they blamed the South Africans. They looked at them and the South Africans were saying, wait a minute, we're just telling you, we've got the ability to spot the new variants. We're just telling you we found this new variant. And now you're blaming us, saying we're the ones who are the source of the variant. And they got smeared. They got pointed at, they got demonized. And the reason was because in Africa, as an entire continent as a whole, there was very low vaccine uptake comparatively to the rest of the world. South Africa at that point had only had about 15 to 20% of their people vaccinated, fully vaccinated with their 2-dose regimen. The rest of Africa, and you go country to country, and you're going to see even lower uptake in certain countries in Africa. But South Africa had a very low uptake comparatively. And they were using their ability to track new variants, their ability to spot them, and their desire to alert the world of the new variant. They used that against South Africa to demonize them and to say, this is why you need to be vaccinated. It is your fault that we now have new variants, even though in reality, a lot of the new variants and some of the jumping from people to animals and back, and the next variant of Omicron actually was spotted, I should say, and likely came from even Denmark, which was actually a highly vaccinated population. But Denmark was the first to acknowledge, this was early on in the pandemic, which of course didn't make any news because they were just trying to tell everybody get vaccinated and then this thing will be over with. But I was reading the science and I knew that this was spreading from people to animals. And in Denmark, they saw that it had spread from a mink farmer to the minks, and then it spread around the minks, and they actually slaughtered all of them, millions of them, and just because they had COVID. And then the minks transferred a new variant back to the humans. So they already knew that it was transferring back and forth between human and people. And so there was no way that we were going to really stop this. But Denmark, they never pointed the finger at Denmark after they spotted the second Omicron variant, and it was really raging around Denmark. It wasn't actually, and it looks like they were the source because it wasn't raging anywhere else. With Omicron, once they started looking for it, they were like, oh, this Omicron is kind of everywhere already. The second version of Omicron was really isolated into Denmark, and Denmark was highly vaccinated. But of course, they didn't demonize Denmark because the whole point and the reason why they demonized South Africa was to get everybody vaccinated. They're trying to scaremonger us into it. So what's interesting is that the entire continent of Africa really had low vaccine uptake. So what they're now saying is, well, we got to get Africa on board on this. If we get them digital IDs, a digitized healthcare system, then we can actually track and deal with this. Because one of the criticisms against a digital ID and moving to that sort of thing is you are now going to prohibit the poorer people around the world from being able to travel. You're going to be limiting the poor and people of color, right? And those are the two groups that liberals, and particularly neoliberals, try to grab onto those groups and say, oh, they're with us, like we're the ones protecting them, we're the ones helping them. And then in reality, all they're doing is locking them down, keeping their kids out of school, keeping their kids uneducated, preventing them from traveling, all of these things, right? So he's talking about digitizing Africa. He then says we've got to digitize healthcare. We've got to improve and digitize healthcare. Now, there is some benefit to that, of course. You know, it is really frustrating when you go to the doctor and they don't have your medical history in front of them. And you're like, you know, I'm with the same medical system. How do you not have all of my records? And now I got to tell you and I got to try to remember. And it's especially difficult the older you get to try to remember every single medication you're on and why and how often you're supposed to take it and yada, 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 right? So there is some benefit to a digitization system of keeping something in one place. But that is being used against us. They're not doing it for the purpose of, we just want to help you, we want to make your life easy. In fact, I'd rather I do that somehow on my own digitally rather than going through a centralized system, because I've now seen, many of us have seen what they do. They abuse these systems and they use them for their own political purposes and to control populations. That's what they've been doing. So I don't really trust now a sort of digitized healthcare centralized system. I think a lot of us are very leery of that. But he's talking about digitizing healthcare, talking about getting Africa on board, talking about getting cooperation, and he's talking about opportunity. And all of that really is leading us towards, marching us towards more vaccine mandates. More vaccine mandates. You cannot do XYZ thing unless you're vaccinated and you have the digital ID. You're not allowed to do that without that digital ID, without that passport. And they're going to be doing that for a variety of vaccines. That's what they're looking at doing. So Tony Blair, now you might say, oh, it's just Tony Blair, whatever. But get this. Tony Blair is on the short list to replace Klaus Schwab for the WEF. Check out this Politico article. This is from Davos, The Race to Succeed Klaus Schwab. And in this article, they talk about how Klaus Schwab is actually sort of treating the WEF as a kind of like, they're saying that he's treating it more like a family heirloom and he wants to maybe pass it down to one of his children. He's got his daughter Nicole, she's a trustee. His son Oliver is a member of the managing board. His wife Hilda runs a foundation connected to WEF. And Klaus Schwab is 85 years old, not in the best of health. Everybody's looking at who's going to succeed him. He's looking at his family, but the powers that be have other people in mind. And on the short list, it says here in this article, the WEF wants a star, Tony Blair. That's who they want. He is the name most commonly suggested is Tony Blair to take over the WEF. So there you have it. Tony Blair is first in line if Klaus Schwab doesn't get his way of passing this down to one of his family members. Tony Blair is the one that everybody wants. And Tony Blair is sitting there talking about, we are going to digitize, make IDs. We're going to be rolling this out and using COVID-19 as an opportunity for future vaccines for all kinds of illnesses in the future. So everybody get ready, because we are looking at a future of more mandates, more digital passports. The future looks very grim if Tony Blair is in charge of the WEF, and if anybody actually takes his suggestions, which unfortunately at the WEF they will. So coming up, the show is now going Rumble exclusive, and you won't want to miss it. I actually sat down with Arizona gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake last night to talk about her ongoing election lawsuit and whether or not she intends to run against Kyrsten Sinema for Senate. We're going to play that interview for you next. Also, we have an insider to the Trump COVID response team who got a front row seat to the corruption that is Dr. Fauci. All of that is NSF for YT. So click the link if you aren't already there. Well, guys, we are living in uncertain times, and it's very frustrating to see government decisions impacting our money. Diversifying our investments by adding gold to our portfolios is a great way to protect our savings during times of inflation, political turmoil, market crashes. And with Birch Gold, it's easy to do. They have almost 20 years of experience in converting traditional IRAs and 401ks into precious metal IRAs, which is a tax-sheltered way to invest in gold and silver. Plus, Birch Gold has an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, thousands of satisfied customers, and positive reviews. They're a reputable choice for anyone looking to invest in gold. You can request a free information kit from Birch Gold by visiting birchgold.com/Kim. I'm a big fan of investing in gold. Really think you should look into it. Really, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So visit birchgold.com/Kim and get that free info kit.